Welcome to the Relational Recovery podcast. I'm your host, Wes Thompson, joined by my co-host, Austin Hill. Today we're talking about faith and how important faith is in our own development and in recovery. So we hope it's helpful. Thanks for listening. Hey, Austin.
Hey, Wes. How are you?
Feeling better today, so that's good.
That is good.
Thanks for being patient with me. We didn't meet last week because I almost lost my voice, but here we are. Today I want to talk about faith, particularly the importance of faith when it comes to our own development, personally, spiritually, when it comes to recovery. And I'll start with this definition, faith being reliance upon and trust in God. Obviously, in that faith is a central tenet, a central emphasis in Christianity. But I think beyond that, I think since we're made in God's image, faith is required throughout. I mean, without faith in life, we don't move forward. Because essentially, for anyone listening, just to think through these questions of like, do you think that you can get better? Do you believe that you can improve? Do you believe that you can grow? All of these things require a sense of faith because we're believing in something we can't necessarily see. We can't necessarily control all of it. It's there's behaviors, there's efforts that we can go after, there's things that we can work towards, but faith, it starts with a belief. Right? A belief in God, obviously, is the most important thing. If we believe that God is, the creator of all things and we are made by God, that's incredibly important. But then it trickles down from there, and faith is required at every step of the journey, it seems. Do I believe? I mean, I find myself wrestling through this all the time. Like, do I believe that I can grow? Do I believe that I can improve? The things that I struggle with and the things that I desire for my family and for my friends and business and work and it's all anchored in belief. And so much of that intersects with faith. With faith. And we even think about, like, from a faith perspective, we think about heaven, we think about life with God. And I know Paul wrote in 1 Timothy 6, we fought the good fight, we finished the race, we've kept the faith. And faith here is something that's highlighted as something that was held on to. And it's kind of articulated in a way, I've kept the faith. It makes it seem like it's something that you could lose. It's something that you had to fight for. It's something that wasn't easy. So in that, we kind of see that faith requires effort. Faith requires intentionality. So I just figured, I think faith is required when we think about aiming to be healthy, when we think about aiming to recover from our hang-ups and habits and addictions, and we think about restoration with our relationships. A lot of what we talk about is we believe, obviously the cornerstone of our recovery is aiming to be relationally healthy as relational beings. And that requires faith. It requires faith for me to trust someone not to hurt me, to tell my story. It requires faith to put myself out there to others. So those are several thoughts to get us started. What do you think of when you think of faith?
Before we press record, like, this is one of those like really big topics when the more you think about it. Because it's a very simple, like, growing. We both grew up in the church, so I got very used to and very comfortable with just saying, yes, I have faith in God, with before even thinking about how big of a deal that was. And so I'm saying that because I think it's very understandable for people to have a lack of faith in God in any type of religious setting, because it's like, well, like why should I believe in that? I don't see evidence of it. I mean, I look at all the crap that's happening in the world, blah blah blah, or the stuff that's happened to me or the people I care about. So we look at that, like, it's like, well, if we just look at all the negative things, there's obviously evidence that there's no God. And then secondary, then you look at all the beautiful things that happen around us, the birth of children, falling in love, being a parent, building a new, making a new friend, and even losing a parent, or losing a friend to whatever, when they, whether it's an overdose. The fact that we grieve the loss of something means that we thought that the relationship was so important that it hurts us when they're gone. So it's like we're acknowledging that something beautiful was there. And that acknowledgement means that there's something beautiful that can happen again in the future. So what I think about when I'm thinking about my faith, it's realizing it, for me, it's reminding myself that because I have faith in something beautiful, every time something nasty or sad happens, doesn't call into question the beauty of what I have faith in. In fact, it highlights why I love what is beautiful. And what I mean, what I mean by that is, I think the hardest thing in this faith in who Jesus is believing when you're in the crap, when you're in the ditch. Like, there's the parable of the prodigal son, or no, I'm sorry, not that one. The good neighbor. When the person that's on the side of the ditch, we're always like, oh man, I'd pick that person up. It's like, dude, the story, you're in the ditch. Like, that's you. You're the one in the ditch. Do I still have did that person, there was plenty of, that guy saw two people who had the means and the ability and the power to really help them. They knew how to solve the problem. They knew the people to protect that person, but they did nothing. So you see two people walk past you that could help you, you start losing faith in humanity. So then that's why that good neighbor story is so beautiful, is the person who didn't have the means, who shouldn't be doing the kind thing from every, cultural and societal. It would be like seeing to put it in, in a very, almost comical modern context, it would be if a Republican was beat up in the corner and a Democrat comes and protects them. It's just kind of why would you? It's like, we're not going to celebrate you getting in, so we're not going to celebrate this person being hurt. We're going to see them as a person. And that's why it's beautiful. It's faith in something that doesn't make sense, that may not happen. And that's why those small moments, to me, are more encouraging. I think they happen. They don't happen very often. And that's why it requires faith. Why I have to put faith that it will happen again. When time and time again, somebody walks by again and again that has the ability to say, to protect, to defend, to do the right thing, and most people don't. But then every once in a while, somebody does the right, just, honest, kind thing. And that is that's what keeps my faith going. I think I'm curious, what do we do when we need to change what we put our faith in? We started with this faith in who God is, but I'm talking about we often talk about the faith we put in ourselves, or the relationships we have with ourselves, others. What do we do when we realize that our faith needs to adjust with something?
Like in what way? Like what are you thinking about?
Like, let's say someone who has a hard time trusting others, they put a ton of faith in themselves and very little in others. And we have to adjust it so it's an appropriate, I trust myself and I trust others in an appropriate way. Like, how do we do that?
Yeah.
Or how do you think through that, Wes?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of life is, to take kind of the words that we often use in Built to Lead. I mean, it's practice. None of these things, just like a sport, none of these things happen quickly. So when it comes to cultivating trust, I think we have to. I think it's easy when we're not healthy because we all oscillate from health and unhealth, but especially when we're unhealthy, the unhealthy person tends to project all of their pain and struggle on other people. In other words, I live in this place of blame, excuses, and denial. And so I think I wouldn't want somebody to hear it and say like it's everyone else's fault. But when you've gone through hard things, it's easy to get into a place of victimhood where now you see as the world is against you and everyone is against you and it's everyone else's fault. And again, people may have hurt you, but you start to see the world just as like against you. And that's not true. And so I think if we're going to cultivate trust, if we're going to cultivate putting faith in others, I think we have to first, and this can be hard, right, if we don't know where to start, but I think we first have to find some trustworthy people to be around. Because, if you keep going back to the same well, they're saying like, I got to practice trust. But if you go back to untrustworthy people, you're probably going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
If someone hasn't listened to I know we just talked about forgiveness recently, and there's a difference between forgiveness and consequences. It's like, if we keep going back to people that have hurt us and giving them more, it's like, maybe that's not going to be helpful, but to try to practice trust with folks that have proven themselves to be trustworthy, I think it just takes practice. Like, we're not going to do it well. Like, people that have that chronically struggle with trust, like sometimes it's oftentimes it's not like a up and to the right growth where everything is perpetually getting better all the time. It's often like, oh man, I feel good this week, and then somebody says something, or I start to struggle with something, and then I feel like I move 3 steps back. And so I would just say that this kind of like faith, when you were talking, and I think this kind of still answers your question. I know this is a long answer, but faith is like, in this way, is often most required when things are tough. Like when life's easy, when belief is easy, we don't often think about faith. I think we often, faith kind of comes into the forefront when it's hard, which is kind of what you're talking about. I mean, it requires a choice. I'm choosing to rely and trust in this person when my body and mind might be saying like, you can't trust anybody. It's like, not trusting anybody is not a good way for anyone to live, because it's not going to lead to the flourishing that God desires for us. But if you come from a place of where that's hard, like, that's an intentional choice. It's not going to be easy. So it takes practice. So those are a couple thoughts. I don't know. How would you answer that question?
I think when we're having to adjust what we put our faith in, it's not. I think for me, what I've been noticing is it's not a lessening of my faith. It's a more awareness of the intentional focus of what I'm putting my faith in, and realizing that I kind of like lackadaisically put faith in things that it didn't make sense to put faith in. So like, if it would be like one of those things, we talked about it last time, the guy who stole my bicycle, and then I Like, I put faith that this guy wouldn't do that when I didn't know him well enough. Like, it was just a bad choice. It was in my mind at the time, it was like, I'm going to, a great way to build trust is to give trust, and it's appropriate trust. That was the mistake I made. It wasn't appropriate trust. Yes, I gave this guy an opportunity to fail, and I trusted that, hoped that he did something right, but that didn't happen. Surprise, surprise. But that doesn't mean that I lost my faith in trusting, in like the act of giving trust to build trust. It's who and when I practice that with, being more intentional and aware and wise of when we do that. That's kind of like, it's one of those, just being a little slower in the decisions. And I think being okay with making people upset when we're trusting ourselves more, or when we're trusting someone else more. Like, I think that's one of the things that I think about often when I'm struggling in faith, is knowing that when Jesus was on the cross, he said, "Why have you forsaken me, God?" Like, if anything, that is a verbal announcement to say, like, what are you doing? How could you do this? That doesn't sound like faith in the way that we think about it often in Christian circles. Like, oh, we can't say anything that says that I'm angry at God, or says that I disagree with God, or that I don't understand. I don't think that was a loss of faith. It was just kind of like acknowledging that, like, I don't know what's happening here, and I don't understand, and I don't like it. And knowing that we trust God enough to, like, I can say those things. Like, and then, like, when in personal times when I've done it, it's like I can think of multiple times where I've been like, would you just, like, I'm talking to, it's like, would you just please take care of my family for once? Like, I think so it's oh man, how silly that sounds. Of course he takes care of my family. I was just really upset about one specific thing, or a cluster of events. But I'm still like, that doesn't mean that I don't believe in who God is. I'm just really ticked off at how something's going. So that doesn't call into question the foundation of my faith, but it does make me, like, be very aware in what I am trusting. Like, am I trusting that the physical well-being of people is why I believe in God? Or if the financial well-being of people that I love, that's why I believe in God. So, like, what am I putting my faith in connection to who God is, and in connection to my relationship with others, myself? So it's a slower, not so flippant thought process of what it means to have faith in something. So, because often it's kind of like, well, look at all the bad in the world, so that means there isn't a God. It's like, well, what about all the good in the world? Does that mean there's like, it's just kind of like, we have to think about these things a lot more broadly than just the singular situational things that we're experiencing in the moment.
And that's really good. That's really good. And so, I mean, I think just reminded that, like, if faith is hard for you, that's normal. Like, that's trust in a broken world is going to be challenging. It's going to be challenging.
Mm.
So hopefully somebody hearing that finds encouragement in that. Like, if you're struggling with this, like that, I mean, that's normal. That's normal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read this quote. This is from the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary. Joseph Healy, in that he writes, at the beginning, as now, the question confronts the very nature of faith itself. Because faith in the Old Testament, as all faith by its very nature, confronts fear. Not just fear, but the fear. The fear that limits, the possibilities of human life, fear of death, fear of self, fear of the universe. You know, hearing you, like I was doing a little bit of reading before we jumped on here, and that was one of the things that stood out to me. But just faith is hard because faith is in direct opposition to fear, as Healy talks about there. And there's a reason that the most often used command, it's like several hundred times in the Bible. What do the prophets and God and what do they say? Fear not.
Fear not.
Right. Fear not.
And gosh, and constantly I'm just like, I call BS on that. Like, it's just like, sure. What do you mean? Like, I'd love to, like, yeah, I'd love, like, when we're that singular situational thing, we look at the lives of the people that are writing it, and even when they're writing it, like often when Paul said that, or in the Old Testament, like stuff's going really bad.
Yeah, it's not that everything's going well. Yeah, exactly.
And they're saying, fear not.
No, I mean, that's, yeah, you hinted, you just said it, what I was thinking. I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy not to fear. Fear is normal. Fear is normal. Being scared is normal. Wanting to hide is normal. Because what did Adam and Eve, what did they do when they ate of the apple and the tempter said, basically don't trust God. The first temptation was a distrust in God, absence of faith, right? Did God really say you couldn't eat the apple? God doesn't want you to eat the apple because he knows that you will now have the knowledge of good and evil. You will be like God. And what did they do? They ate of it, and then God came through the midst of the garden, and he called out to Adam and Eve because he couldn't find them. Because what were they doing? They were hiding. They were hiding. And so in our distrust, in our fear, we hide. In our shame, we hide. And it takes, yeah, that's why God says over and over again in Scripture, fear not. Often it's like fear not. And it's not like fear not because you're strong. It's fear not because I'm with you. You're not alone. You're not alone. I mean, the ultimate relational recovery we need is to know that God is with us. But God also is bringing us into community with his people. I am with you, and there are people that you can commune with that aren't going to hurt you. But the reality is you will get hurt. You will get bruised up and scraped up at times, And a matter of fact, you're probably going to scrape other people up at times and bruise other people up at times. With your words, that's a guarantee. With your words, with your actions. But it's like, it's a call to faith. It's a call to trust. Again, that definition at the beginning that I said, reliance upon and trust in God. That, again, that's easy when things are great, but this is often a call. Like, faith is often most required when things are tough. And I think about like Moses, right? When he's delivering the people out of Egypt, there was probably a euphoria after, for those listening, like if you're familiar with the Exodus story, I mean, there was all these plagues that came down on the Egyptians and on Pharaoh because of the captivity of these Israelites for 400 years. And Moses is sent in, called by God to deliver the people. And after the 10th plague, firstborn, the Egyptians are killed. The Israelites are sent out, and I'm sure they're just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But then what do they encounter? They encounter a sea. They're faced at the Red Sea. Pharaoh changes his mind. They're racing after him. Can you imagine in that moment? I'm just thinking of like Moses, like he's probably like, what the heck, God?
Yeah, it's like, well, this was an odd turn of events.
Are you really going to show up? And maybe some of you feel that way today. Like, you feel like God's called you. You feel like you've had these moments of excitement and transformation, but now you're wondering, you're faced with something hard. Maybe, there's a myriad of things that could be going on, right? You're struggling with temptation, or maybe you messed up, or maybe um, there's brokenness in your family, or you feel like you're doing well and you want others to acknowledge it, but there's some people that still don't want to talk to you. And it's like, you're facing that kind of, God, why did you bring me out here just to let me die? And I think that's what makes that story so powerful. It's not that Moses is powerful or the people are powerful. It's that God does what he says he's going to do, even when it doesn't look like it can happen. Because what we know from the story is God parts the Red Sea and the Israelites go through, and ultimately Pharaoh and many of his army are engulfed into the sea. And it's this picture of God's providence and God's protection over it's ultimately a story about, if God can do for you what he wants to do, even when it looks like it's impossible. And all of that sounds great, but that requires a heck ton of faith. Because what that means is there's going to be many times in life where it doesn't look like things are going to go well. And that's when faith is required. That's when reliance upon God and upon others is required. That's when trust is required. So if you and I can't trust, if you and I don't know how to rely on God and others appropriately, we're not going to make it. We're not going to make it.
Yep. I think that the final thought I have is kind of still using in thinking about the story of Moses. He parted God parted the Red Sea through an action that he told Moses to do. If you think about the like smallness of what God was asking of Moses. Like, hey, if I don't know, if I saw a giant group of people coming to kill my entire community, and then God says, hey, I need you to pick up a stick and put it in the water. What? Everything is that's not what is that going to do? It's behind everything. The problem's coming from the other way. That makes no sense. So Moses's faith was a physical action. It was faith in action.
This is how crazy my mind is. When I think about that story, what I think about, I imagine being the young guy who's just who's looking at Moses with his staff raised, the water parted, and thinking, I'm really going to walk through this.
It's no thanks.
Do I trust? What? I mean, can you imagine? But what a picture of how life feels often. Wait, you want me to go through that? But what if I die? But what if the water crushes me? And for people, for Christian leaders, business owners, guys going through the refuge, it's often that's the question sometimes. God, you want me to do that? Will I be okay? Will I be taken care of? How's this going to end up? That's a universal feeling. And that's when faith is required, right?
Yeah, it is.
Well, let's end by, Austin, what would you say to a guy in the refuge who's really struggling and doesn't know how to cultivate faith? What's maybe just a practical encouragement we can end with?
I think the practical encouragement is practice gratitude and thankfulness for the small things that you do that do happen throughout the day. There are dozens of small things that happen throughout the day that are good, that are for your well-being, that other people do for you with no like benefit to their own. So it's like being aware and looking for those things, and then be genuinely grateful for them because they didn't have to happen. So look for those things, small things throughout there. Nothing big. Like, we're not looking for like an epic life-altering moment. Small little things, because those are the things that really do matter to people.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Relational Recovery Podcast. We'll be back soon with a new conversation. We'll see you then.